the big macro questions are going to be handled by an elite group. So the China model starts to become rather attractive as actually a form of governance that can actually work. But, as I suggested, the 3% growth, compound growth, which is not quite being achieved in the global economy right now through this balance of the China growing at 10% and India at 9% and, and the United States at 1% and Europe at 0%. That scenario is not possible to go forward over the next 50 years. That is, something radically different has to happen. And that radically different can either be the scenario I just said, which would have capital actually move into a completely fictitious world, in which it would almost be a kind of virtual capitalism, where people would be living on vast amounts of wealth and power, probably a concentration of wealth and power that would have 50 families control about 80% or 90% of global wealth, which is not impossible given the current dynamics. I mean, the number of billionaires who've erupted in India in the last, there were 26 billionaires in India 5 years ago. There are now 69. The billionaires in China are now catching up with those in the United States. So, these concentrations of wealth are already there, and they're not going away. They have not been hurt by the crisis. In fact, they've increased during the crisis. So you either look at an increasingly polarized society in which the wealthy will live in their ghettos and the rest of us will be sort of scrabbling for scraps around everywhere else. It's either that, or else there's going to be some sort of radical eruption against all of this. And then the question arises, well, where do you start and what do you have to do in order to devise an anti-capitalist economy? What would an anti-capitalist economy look like? Now, to me, that is in itself an extremely interesting question. Because what it has to do is to actually talk about what is the nature of capital and what is it that we have to be anti. And there are two arguments, again, that come out of Marx, Volume 2. The first is that money is not capital. Commodities are not capital. Even the buying and selling of labor power is not capital. What is capital is a class relation between capital and labor in the act of production that allows capital to extract a surplus from the work of the laborer. What that leads to is to say, well, the alternative to capitalism has to be worker self-management. And Marx again and again actually says the associated laborers in charge of their own production processes, making their own decisions, should be the base of any alternative system. Now, this is odd, because Glenn Beck and others always goes on about how, Marxists are always about state domination, about this and that and that and this. Not true. Marx was about the associated laborers controlling their own production processes. But, the end of Volume 2, you have a problem. How do you actually control and coordinate the activities of these many, many different groups controlling their own production? How do you make sure that if you want to make a car that the steel is there and enough steel is there, that enough rubber is there? How do those proportionalities work out? The general idea in theoretically and under capitalism is the market does it for you. And that the alternative, which is sort of centralized state planning, is a disaster. And right now the left doesn't want to talk about any kind of centralized state planning because, the left is basically about local action and local, it's all in favor of the associated laborers controlling their own thing, but not thinking about the question of coordination. So how does coordination work? Well, actually, the corporations know how to do it, because actually the corporations don't work through the market very much. They actually have a control and command system back through their supply chain. They send an order down their supply chain and say, we want so much steel, or we want so much, of this, or so much of that. They don't actually go out and haggle in the market and say, okay, now I've got the steel, now I can do it. No, they orchestrate it. And it's all orchestrated on a just-in-time system in which they say, we want so much steel on such and such a day, and we want so much more steel on the day after that, and then we want this amount of, you know. So actually, corporations engage in centralized planning, and in a very sophisticated way. And it's not hard at all to imagine that capacity for centralized planning, it currently exists in corporations. Walmart, for example, does it beautifully. It's not hard to imagine taking that over and turning it to a social purpose instead of turning it into mere profiteering. And when I say that to people, say, you like Walmart? And my answer is, well, they've come up with some techniques that we can use. And we shouldn't run away from talking about those techniques just because Walmart has it. We should really study those things and figure out how it works. Because the one centrally planned economy, which really worked extremely well, was World War II in the United States, which was when Roosevelt called all the corporate heads to Washington and said to them, you know how to plan all this stuff, get it done. We want the ships, we want the tanks, we want the aircraft, and we want it done, and we want it done fast. And boy, did they do it well, and boy, did they do it fast. And that was one of the things that terrified corporate capital, that they were actually part of a centrally planned economy. And they were the agents of a centrally planned economy, which was actually something that Marx envisioned. He talked about joint stock companies, and he said, actually, these are associated capitals. The individual capitalist is gone. Associated capitals knows how to do these things. That is the transitional organization that can take us into another world. And I think that that is, if you like, one of the ideas that I'd like to throw out. That there is an alternative, and it already exists. We just have to be able to go in and understand how it's working right now and how it can be converted to something completely different. That is what we need to do. But before we do that, we've also got to demystify all of this nonsense, which we're taught, you know, by the neoliberal economists and even the Keynesians, that somehow or other deepening what we're currently doing is going to be the answer to the difficulties we're in. Compound growth forever is impossible. An alternative has to arise in which there's a zero-growth economy. Economic inequality has to be eradicated. Environmental degradation has to be stopped. And there's only one way to do it, and that's to end capitalism. Thanks very much.
Given the Supreme Court decision granting corporate personhood, what are the chances that's going to make it much more difficult to end capitalism? And is Russ Feingold, in his efforts to undo that, a worthwhile first step?
All right. Well, Professor Harvey, just thank you so much for a wonderful talk. My name's Nick. I'm an undergraduate from out at Swarthmore College, and on Monday, Robert Putnam came to Swarthmore College, and I think one of the things he was saying was that in America today, the distribution of social capital, which is really one of the focuses of his work, has come to mirror more and more the distribution of financial capital. So the distribution of goods and social organizations, such as education or involvement in church. A lot of these forms of social organization have come to be increasingly centered, in or class divided rather. And I'd just like to ask if you think that's the case and what you think the implications of that are for, the continuation or end of capitalism.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for being here. On my way over here tonight, I was hearing the news about President Obama campaigning for the extension of the payroll tax deduction, the reduction, I think it's 3%, whatever. And I'm wondering if this is not a part of a long-term strategy to create, basically to destroy Social Security, as that is what it funds.
The personhood of corporations, I think one of the more serious things that happened historically, and I think I heard somewhere the other day that actually it never came about. It really came about by accident and subterfuge that people started to treat corporations as individuals. And I think that actually rolling that back is a very crucial part of the immediate reform requirements. So I'm very much in favor of withdrawing that. I mean, I do have this kind of problem that if you treat them as persons and you can't put them in jail, then what does that do? Social capital and financial capital, yes, I think they go very much together, and I think that this is the financialization of pretty much all aspects of daily life is becoming a very, very serious issue for many people, and that relationship. I mean, it's a dialectic, if you will, because on the one hand, you need financial capital in order to get the social capital, and then the social capital is the means to get the finance, and so the two go together, and you see a lot of that going on inside of the educational system. I've lost count of the number of times when I ask sort of kids, for example, sometimes casually, well, what do you envisage doing when you graduate? And they say, well, I'm going to go and make money. And you say, well, is that the only ambition you have? Well, yeah. What else is there? You kind of go, well, actually, there's a lot else, but I think, but this is what I mean by, we're all neoliberals now without knowing it, and we're all kind of Thatcherites without knowing it. And it's so deeply ingrained now in our ways of thinking that I mean, even I wake up in the morning and go and check my financial capital, and particularly my pension fund, and say, oh my God, another day it's gone down another 5%. But so we get that involvement. And I don't know. I'm not so sure about this payroll tax thing. I think in the immediate, I mean, I would worry about Social Security for other reasons, but for obvious reasons. But I think this is the only way that Obama, who would like to do some modest Keynesian kind of stimulus, can get it through by putting the Republicans in such a box that they can't really say no. And to the degree that financial stimulus is going to be absolutely crucial to his re-election chances, then I see it more as a sort of short-run kind of an attempt to get a bit of a mild stimulus through this payroll tax extension. I don't attach anything more sinister to it than that. But it could, of course, impinge upon the future of Social Security, but I think that's another kind of question that can be resisted in its own right. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Harvey. I just have a question. I'd like to hear some of your comments on what's taking place in Latin America, particularly a lot of the social strides in Venezuela, Bolivia. I just read that Daniel Ortega, the new president of Nicaragua, is not going to be recognized by Washington. So kind of something along the lines, do you think Washington is threatened by what's going on in Latin America? Do you think that the Bolivarian Alliance for the Americas can be a significant way to keep the money circulating within Latin America? Do you think there's a hope there for kind of another alternative possibly in the near future? Thanks.
Hi, Professor Harvey. Please forgive my bouncing. I have a 3-month-old on my shoulder.
Yeah.
I wanted to know what your message would be tonight to the folks who are going to be coming out of jail at the Roundhouse, and for the others who've been either occupying at City Hall with them or who've been supporting them.